Jake Morrison floated through the corridor of the massive alien ship called Horizon's Edge. The walls glowed with a soft blue light that reminded him of deep ocean water back on Earth. He carried his data pad and a small bag containing his personal items. Today was his first day attending the Galactic Educational Council classes, and he had no idea what to expect. The human had been chosen as Earth's first representative after the aliens made contact 6 months ago. They called it First Contact Protocol, but Jake thought it felt more like going to school again. He was 32 years old, and had spent most of his life studying animals on Earth. Now he was about to learn about creatures from across the galaxy. Jake found the classroom after asking directions from a floating creature that looked like a jellyfish made of light. The being had been very helpful and spoke through musical tones that his universal translator converted to English. The technology still amazed him even after months of using it. The classroom was huge and filled with the strangest collection of beings Jake had ever seen. He counted 17 different species, not including himself. Some looked like giant spiders made of crystal that reflected rainbow colors when they moved. Others resembled armored lizards that walked on 2 legs and had 4 arms each. The floating jellyfish beings drifted near the ceiling, their bodies pulsing with different colored lights. Jake took a seat designed for humanoid creatures. The chair adjusted itself to fit his body perfectly, which was both comfortable and slightly unsettling. He looked around at his classmates and wondered what they thought of the lone human among them. At the front of the room stood their instructor. The being called itself Veltar and belonged to a species called the Kethani. Veltar was tall and thin with pale green skin that seemed to shimmer. Its head was larger than a human head, and its eyes were completely black with no visible pupils. When Veltar spoke, its voice was melodic and calm. "Welcome, students, to your orientation on galactic predator recognition," Veltar began. "This course is mandatory for all newly contacted species. The knowledge you gain here may save your lives when you travel between worlds." Jake listened with interest. On Earth, he had spent years studying predators like wolves, bears, and big cats. He wondered how different alien predators might be from the ones he knew. Veltar continued speaking. "The galaxy contains thousands of known predator species. Some hunt in packs, others prefer to ambush their prey. Some are larger than your ships, others smaller than your smallest insects. What they all have in common is their ability to kill." The crystalline spider beings changed color from clear to deep purple. Jake's translator informed him this indicated fear or anxiety in their species. The armored lizards pulled their heads slightly into their shells, and the jellyfish creatures dimmed their lights. "Today we will focus on the most dangerous predators in known space," Veltar said. "These creatures have shaped the evolution and culture of entire civilizations. Some species have abandoned entire star systems rather than face these beasts." Jake found this fascinating. On Earth, humans had learned to coexist with dangerous predators. They built fences, used weapons, and developed strategies to avoid conflicts. Sometimes they even studied predators to learn from them. The idea of abandoning entire planets seemed extreme to him. Veltar activated a holographic display that showed images of various alien landscapes. Each scene looked beautiful but somehow threatening. Strange forests with twisted trees, vast deserts with moving sand, and oceans that seemed to boil with activity. Each of these environments is home to apex predators, Veltar explained, creatures that sit at the top of their food chains with no natural enemies except others of their kind. The first image showed a creature that looked like a cross between a tiger and a shadow. Its body seemed to absorb light, making it difficult to see clearly. Its teeth were visible, though, long and curved like sabers. "The shadow stalkers of Zerion Prime," Veltar said. "They hunt by bending light around themselves, becoming nearly invisible. Entire colonies have been lost to these creatures." Several students made sounds that Jake's translator interpreted as gasps or expressions of fear. Jake studied the creature with professional interest. It reminded him of the way some Earth predators used camouflage, though this alien version was far more advanced. Next came an image of something that looked like a massive centipede with wings. Its body stretched across the entire holographic display, suggesting it was enormous in real life. "The void serpents," Veltar continued. "They live in the space between planets, feeding on minerals from asteroids. When food becomes scarce, they have been known to attack space stations and even small ships." Jake wondered how such a creature could survive in the vacuum of space. The biology must be completely different from anything on Earth. He made a mental note to ask questions later if time allowed. The presentation continued with more creatures, each more impressive than the last. There were pack hunters that could phase through solid matter, flying predators with acid breath, and something called a planet cracker that was apparently so large it could damage entire worlds. Throughout the presentation, Jake noticed his classmates becoming more and more distressed. The crystal spiders had turned almost black, the armored lizards had completely withdrawn into their shells, and the jellyfish beings had dimmed their light so much they were barely visible. Jake found himself thinking about Earth's predators. Great white sharks that could grow over 20 feet long, polar bears that weighed more than a small car, saltwater crocodiles that could remain perfectly still for hours before striking with lightning speed. Humans had learned to respect these creatures but not to fear them to this degree. Veltar seemed to notice the mood in the room. "I know this information can be overwhelming," the instructor said gently, "but knowledge is your best defense against these creatures. By understanding how they hunt and what they are capable of, you can avoid becoming their prey." Jake raised his hand. "Excuse me, Instructor Veltar. How do your people normally deal with these predators? Do you study them or try to avoid them completely?" Veltar looked surprised by the question. "We avoid them, of course. No intelligent species would willingly encounter such dangerous creatures unless absolutely necessary. Even our best scientists study them only through long-distance observation and recovered footage." Jake nodded but found this approach puzzling. On Earth, scientists regularly studied dangerous animals up close. They used protective equipment and careful procedures, but direct observation was common. Some humans even worked as wildlife photographers, getting close to predators to capture images and footage. "Tomorrow we will experience something even more educational," Veltar announced as the class period neared its end. "You will hear the actual sounds these predators make. This audio library has been compiled over centuries and represents the most complete collection of predator vocalizations in the galaxy." The other students made various sounds of distress at this announcement. Jake found himself looking forward to it. Jake arrived at the classroom early the next day. He wanted to get a good seat and observe his classmates before the lesson began. The other students filed in slowly, and Jake noticed they all seemed nervous. The crystal spider beings had turned a dull gray color, and the armored lizards kept their heads pulled partway into their shells even while walking. Veltar entered the room carrying what looked like a complex audio device. The instructor placed it on the desk at the front of the classroom and began connecting various cables to the room's sound system. Jake watched with curiosity while his classmates seemed to shrink into their seats. "Today we will experience the Predator Audio Archive," Veltar announced. "This collection contains the recorded vocalizations of the galaxy's most dangerous creatures. Some of these sounds have never been heard by civilians. They were obtained at great cost and significant risk to the brave researchers who recorded them." One of the jellyfish beings pulsed with what Jake's translator identified as a question. "Is it safe to hear these sounds, Instructor?" Veltar paused before answering. "The sounds themselves cannot harm you physically. However, I must warn you that some students have experienced extreme psychological reactions. These vocalizations trigger deep evolutionary responses in most species. If you feel overwhelmed, please signal me immediately." Jake found this warning interesting but not particularly concerning. He had heard plenty of animal sounds during his work on Earth. Wolves howling, bears growling, big cats roaring. Some were certainly intimidating, but they were just sounds. He settled back in his chair and waited for the demonstration to begin. Veltar dimmed the lights in the classroom until only a soft glow remained. "We will begin with some of the lesser predators and work our way up to the most dangerous. Remember, these are the actual sounds recorded in the wild. They represent real encounters with living predators." The first sound filled the room through speakers Jake couldn't see. It was a high-pitched screech that seemed to go on forever. The sound had an echo quality that suggested it came from inside a cave or tunnel. Jake listened carefully and noted that it reminded him a bit of a hawk's cry, but much louder and more aggressive. Around him, his classmates reacted strongly. The crystal spiders turned completely black and hunched down low. Several of the armored lizards pulled their heads all the way into their shells with audible clicks. The jellyfish beings stopped glowing entirely and sank toward the floor. "The glass stalkers of Xerion Prime," Veltar explained when the sound ended. "They use echolocation to hunt in complete darkness. This cry can be heard from over 50 kilometers away. Jake made a mental note about the echolocation. Bats on Earth used similar techniques, though their calls were usually too high for humans to hear without special equipment. He wondered if the glass stalkers were similar to bats in other ways. The next sound was deeper and more rumbling. It started low and built to a roar that shook the room slightly. Jake could feel the vibrations through his chair and in his chest. The sound had a wet quality that suggested the creature making it had a lot of saliva or lived in a humid environment. The marsh titans of Kelvar 7, Veltar said. They are amphibious predators that can grow to the size of your smaller spacecraft. This roar is their territorial call. Jake thought about alligators and crocodiles on Earth. They made similar territorial roars during mating season, though probably not quite as loud as what they had just heard. The wet quality of the sound definitely suggested an amphibious creature. More sounds followed, each one accompanied by visible distress from Jake's classmates. There were clicking sounds from pack hunters that coordinated their attacks, whistling calls from flying predators, and deep thuds that came from creatures so large they communicated through ground vibrations. Jake found each recording interesting from a scientific perspective. Many reminded him of Earth animals, though usually louder or more complex. He began to wonder if predator behavior followed similar patterns across different worlds. The sounds all served purposes he recognized. Territorial claims, hunting calls, warnings to rivals. Now we come to the more dangerous specimens, Veltar announced. The instructor's voice had grown more serious. These next recordings were obtained from research teams that did not survive their encounters. Please prepare yourselves. A new sound began unlike anything they had heard before. It started as a whisper that seemed to come from all directions at once. The whisper grew into a wail that rose and fell in waves. There was something about the sound that made Jake's skin crawl slightly, though he wasn't sure why. Around him, several students were visibly shaking. One of the armored lizards had fallen off its chair and was lying on its side with all four legs pulled up against its shell. Two of the jellyfish beings had actually fainted and were floating motionless near the ceiling. The wraiths of the Void Nebula, Veltar whispered. They exist partially in normal space and partially in dimensions we don't understand. This sound is how they communicate across both dimensions simultaneously. Jake had never heard anything quite like it on Earth. The closest comparison might be whale songs, which also had an otherworldly quality, but this was far more unsettling. He could understand why it affected the other students so strongly. The recordings continued, each one more disturbing than the last. There were sounds that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and resonate directly in the listener's bones. Others created a sense of movement in the room even though nothing was actually moving. Jake found himself gripping his chair during some of the more intense recordings. We have reached the final recording, Veltar announced. The instructor's voice was barely above a whisper now. What you are about to hear is considered the most terrifying sound in known space. It comes from a creature so dangerous that entire sectors have been evacuated rather than risk an encounter. The classroom fell into complete silence. Jake could hear his own heartbeat and the quiet breathing of his classmates. Even the ship's background hum seemed to fade away. This recording cost the lives of 3 separate research teams, Veltar continued. It was transmitted to us by automated equipment after all organic crew members were confirmed dead. The creature responsible has never been successfully studied or even properly observed. We know it only through the devastation it leaves behind. Jake leaned forward slightly in anticipation. After everything they had heard, he was curious what could be worse than the dimensional wails of the void wraiths. I present to you, Veltar said solemnly, the Beast of Cathara. The speakers crackled to life with a sound that immediately commanded attention. The sound that filled the classroom was unlike anything they had heard in the previous recordings. It began as a low rumble deep in the throat, building slowly like distant thunder. The rumble grew into a growl that seemed to vibrate through the floor and walls. Then, without warning, the growl exploded into a piercing scream that cut through the air like a blade. The scream held notes of pure aggression and wild fury. It spoke of muscles coiled for attack, of claws and teeth ready to tear flesh. The sound rose and fell in waves, each wave more intense than the last. It was raw and primal in a way that reached something deep in the brain, something that remembered when survival meant running from creatures with sounds like this. Around Jake, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Every single one of his classmates showed signs of absolute terror. The crystal spider beings had turned completely transparent, trying to become invisible. The armored lizards were making high-pitched whimpering sounds from deep inside their shells. Several jellyfish beings had dropped to the floor and were pulsing rapidly with distress signals. One student, a creature that looked like a walking tree with multiple eyes, had actually started shedding its bark-like skin. Jake's translator indicated this was an extreme fear response equivalent to a human fainting. The air in the room filled with various scents and sounds as different species released stress hormones and alarm calls. The recording continued for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. When it finally ended, the silence that followed was deeper than before. It was the silence of prey animals hiding from a predator, afraid that any sound might draw unwanted attention. Veltar stood perfectly still at the front of the room. The instructor's pale green skin had gone almost white, and those large black eyes seemed to stare at nothing. When Veltar finally spoke, the voice was barely audible. "That," the instructor whispered, "is the voice of the most feared creature in known space. The Beast of Kethara has been responsible for the destruction of 7 research stations, the disappearance of 12 exploration teams, and the evacuation of an entire moon colony." Jake listened to this information with growing recognition. The sound had been familiar from the moment it started. Very familiar. As Veltar continued describing the terror this creature had caused across the galaxy, Jake found himself fighting back laughter. "No weapon has ever harmed it," Veltar continued. "No trap has ever held it. It appears without warning, destroys everything in its path, and vanishes back into the wilderness. Some theorists believe it may not even be a natural creature, but rather some kind of supernatural force given physical form." The laughter started as a small snort that Jake tried to suppress. But as Veltar described this ultimate predator in increasingly dramatic terms, the humor of the situation became too much. A chuckle escaped, then another. Soon Jake was laughing openly despite his efforts to control himself. The sound of human laughter in the deadly quiet classroom was like a bomb going off. Every head turned toward Jake. The crystal spiders shifted from transparent to deep red, indicating shock or anger. The armored lizards poked their heads out of their shells to stare at him. Even the fainted jellyfish beings began to glow again as they looked in his direction. Veltar's expression went from fear to confusion to something approaching anger. "Student Jake Morrison," the instructor said sharply, "do you find something amusing about the galaxy's most dangerous predator?" Jake tried to compose himself but kept breaking into fresh laughter. "I'm sorry," he managed between chuckles. "I really am. It's just that I know what that sound is." The classroom remained silent except for Jake's continued laughter. Veltar approached his desk with careful steps, as if worried the human might be having some kind of mental breakdown. "You recognize the call of the Beast of Kethara?" Veltar asked with disbelief. "That's impossible. No being has ever encountered this creature and lived to tell about it." Jake wiped tears from his eyes and tried to get his breathing under control. "It's not a monster," he said, still chuckling. "That's just a cougar. We call them mountain lions sometimes, or pumas. My Uncle Larry has one that wanders around his property back in Colorado." The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear the ship's air recycling system humming in the walls. Veltar stared at him as if he had just claimed to be able to fly through space without a ship. "A cougar," Veltar repeated slowly. "You're telling me that the most feared predator in the galaxy is something that wanders around your uncle's property?" "Well, yeah," Jake said, his laughter finally subsiding. "I mean, they're definitely dangerous if you're not careful. Adult cougars can weigh up to about 200 pounds and they're incredibly strong, but humans have been living alongside them for thousands of years. We just use common sense precautions." Jake pulled out his personal data pad and began scrolling through his files. "I actually have some videos of cougars from Earth if you want to see them. My cousin Pete is a wildlife photographer and he's got some great footage." The classroom erupted into chaos as Jake's words sank in. Students began making sounds and movements that his translator struggled to interpret. Most seemed to be expressions of disbelief, horror, or panic. One of the tree-like beings actually fell over with a crash that shook the room. Veltar's voice cracked as the instructor spoke. "You're saying that humans live on the same world as these creatures? Voluntarily?" "Oh, it gets better," Jake said cheerfully, finding a video file on his data pad. "Earth has lots of predators that would probably scare you guys. Bears, wolves, crocodiles, sharks, tigers if you count the Asian continent. And don't even get me started on hippos. Those things kill more people in Africa than lions do." Jake turned his datapad around to show the screen to Veltar. and the nearby students. The video showed a cougar walking across a rocky hillside, its muscles moving smoothly under tawny fur. The animal paused and looked directly at the camera, then opened its mouth and made the exact same sound they had just heard through the classroom speakers. "See?" Jake said proudly. "Same sound. Pete took this video about 50 miles from where my uncle lives. The cougar probably has cubs nearby, which is why she's being so vocal. They're very protective mothers." Veltar took the datapad with shaking hands and stared at the video. The instructor replayed it several times, comparing the sound to recordings in the teaching database. Other students crowded around as much as their various physiologies allowed, creating a bizarre scene of alien beings studying footage of a common Earth predator. "The audio signature matches perfectly," Veltar whispered. "But this is impossible. Your species lives on the same world as the beast of Cathara." "We don't call it that," Jake corrected. "But yeah, same animal. There are probably about 30,000 of them in North America alone. They're actually doing pretty well conservation-wise, which is nice because they were endangered for a while." Jake looked around at his terrified classmates and began to realize the implications of what he had just revealed. The chaos in the classroom continued as more students gathered around Jake's datapad. Veltar had connected the device to the room's main display system, and now the video of the cougar played on a screen large enough for everyone to see. The familiar tawny cat walked across the rocky terrain, completely unaware that it was causing a galactic identity crisis. "This cannot be accurate," declared one of the armored lizard beings, its voice trembling through the translator. "The beast of Cathara destroyed the mining station on Kepler 442b. It killed 300 trained security personnel and their war machines." Jake watched the cougar video loop for the 4th time and shrugged. "Cougars are ambush predators. If people didn't know they were there and got caught by surprise, I can see how that might happen. They're incredibly fast and strong for their size." "Their size?" Veltar's voice cracked on the words. "Our records indicate the beast of Cathara is enormous, larger than your Earth vehicles." "Not really," Jake said, thinking about it. "Adult male cougars usually weigh between 100 and 200 pounds. Females are smaller, maybe 80 to 130. They're about 8 feet long, including the tail, but a lot of that is tail. Height at the shoulders maybe 2.5 feet. Jake noticed the complete silence that greeted this information. He looked around at his classmates and saw expressions of shock and disbelief on every face capable of making such expressions. "How big did you guys think they were?" he asked. Veltar consulted a data tablet with trembling hands. "Our estimates based on the destruction patterns suggested a creature at least 20 feet tall and weighing several tons. The claw marks found at attack sites were enormous." "Oh, that makes sense," Jake nodded. "Cougar claws can extend up to about 2 inches long, and they're sharp enough to cut through leather pretty easily. If they were scratching metal or rock, the gouges would look bigger than you'd expect from the animal's actual size." Jake pulled up another file on his datapad. "Here, let me show you some more Earth predators for comparison. This might help put things in perspective." The new video showed a massive brown bear catching salmon in a river. The bear stood on its hind legs, revealing its true size as it towered over the rushing water. It had to weigh at least 800 pounds, with claws longer than human fingers and muscles that rippled under thick fur. "This is a grizzly bear," Jake explained cheerfully. "They're found in the same general areas as cougars, actually. People hike and camp in bear country all the time. You just have to follow basic safety rules like storing your food properly and making noise so you don't surprise them." Several students made sounds that the translator interpreted as whimpering or prayers to various deities. One of the crystal spider beings had turned so dark it was almost invisible against the classroom floor. Jake continued scrolling through his files. "Oh, here's a good one. This is a saltwater crocodile from Australia. They can grow over 20 feet long and weigh more than a ton. Unlike cougars, these guys actually are as big as you thought the beast of Cathara was." The video showed a massive reptile erupting from murky water to snatch a large fish. The crocodile's jaws were lined with teeth the size of railroad spikes, and its body disappeared into the dark water, like a living log of muscle and armor. "Humans swim in waters where these live?" asked one of the jellyfish beings in a voice so faint the translator barely picked it up. "Well, not in the same exact spots usually," Jake admitted. "But yeah, people swim in northern Australia. There are safety guidelines and warning signs in dangerous areas. Most crocodile attacks happen when people ignore the warnings or do something stupid. Veltar was frantically taking notes while reviewing Jake's videos. "Student Morrison, you mentioned other predators. Tigers, was it?" "Oh, definitely," Jake said enthusiastically. "Tigers are amazing predators. They can weigh up to 600 pounds and are incredibly powerful. A tiger can drag prey twice its own weight up a tree. They're also excellent swimmers, unlike most big cats." Jake found a video of a tiger stalking through tall grass. The animal moved with fluid grace, every muscle perfectly coordinated. When it looked toward the camera, its eyes held the cold intelligence of a perfect predator. "The scary thing about tigers is how smart they are," Jake continued. "They can plan complex hunts and adapt their strategies based on their prey. In India, there are stories of tigers that figured out how to hunt humans specifically, learning to avoid the weapons and tactics people used against them. And humans coexist with these creatures voluntarily." Veltar's voice was barely a whisper. "India has over 1 billion people," Jake pointed out. "They've shared the continent with tigers for thousands of years. It's all about understanding the animals and taking appropriate precautions." Jake scrolled through more files, warming to his subject. "Now, if you really want to see something scary, check out this great white shark. They can grow over 20 feet long and have a bite force of about 4,000 pounds per square inch." The shark video showed a massive predator breaching the water surface, its body completely airborne for a moment. Rows of triangular teeth filled its mouth, and its black eyes showed no emotion at all as it crashed back into the ocean. "Some humans actually cage dive with great whites for fun," Jake added casually. "It's become quite a tourist industry." At this point, several students had completely shut down. The armored lizards had withdrawn so far into their shells that they looked like decorative rocks. The crystal spiders had gone completely transparent. Even the jellyfish beings had stopped glowing and were floating motionless near the ceiling. Veltar set down the datapad and stared at Jake with something approaching horror. "Student Morrison, are you telling me that your species evolved on a world where you are surrounded by creatures that we would classify as galactic-level threats?" Jake thought about this for a moment. "I guess so, yeah. I mean, we don't really think of them as threats exactly. They're just part of the ecosystem. Humans learned to use tools and work together to deal with predators. We also got really good at pattern recognition and threat assessment." "Pattern recognition," Veltar repeated faintly. "Sure," Jake said. "Like I could tell that sound was a cougar because I've heard them before. Any human who spends time outdoors would probably recognize it. We learned to identify animal signs and sounds as kids. It's basic survival knowledge." Jake paused and looked around the classroom at his traumatized classmates. For the first time, he began to understand what his casual knowledge meant to beings from worlds without such predators. "Oh," he said quietly, "you guys don't have anything like this on your homeworlds, do you?" Word of what happened in Veltar's classroom spread through the horizon's edge faster than Jake thought possible. Within hours, he found himself summoned to meet with Captain Zenthara, the ship's commanding officer. The captain was a Kethani like Veltar, but older and more decorated, with intricate markings on her pale green skin that indicated high rank. "Student Morrison," Captain Zenthara began, her voice carrying the weight of authority, "we need to discuss your homeworld immediately. What you revealed today has caused significant concern among our xenobiology teams." Jake sat across from the captain in her private office, which was designed to accommodate multiple species. The chair adjusted to his human proportions while holographic displays showed images of Earth rotating slowly in space. "I'm not sure I understand the problem," Jake said honestly. "I just identified an animal sound. It seemed like the kind of thing you'd want to know for your records." Captain Zenthara touched a control panel, and new images appeared on the displays. They showed devastation on various alien worlds, destroyed buildings, torn metal, and excavation sites that looked like war zones. "This is the damage attributed to your cougar over the past 50 years, the captain explained. 7 research stations destroyed, 12 exploration teams lost, 1 moon colony evacuated. We estimated the creature responsible was a supernatural force of destruction." Jake studied the images with professional interest. "Well, cougars are territorial animals. If people built research stations in their territory without understanding cougar behavior, conflicts were probably inevitable. Did anyone try to study the local ecosystem before establishing these facilities?" The captain's large black eyes blinked slowly. "Study the ecosystem? Student Morrison, we're talking about the most dangerous predator in known space. No one would willingly approach such a creature. But that's exactly what you need to do, Jake said, leaning forward with enthusiasm. Understanding predator behavior is the key to coexistence. On Earth, wildlife biologists study dangerous animals all the time. They use tracking collars, remote cameras, and careful observation to learn how predators hunt, breed, and claim territory. Jake pulled out his datapad and showed more videos from Earth. Look, here's footage of researchers working with wild bears. They use tranquilizer darts to safely sedate the animals for health checkups and collar placement. The bears aren't harmed, and the scientists learn valuable information about their behavior patterns. Captain Zenthara watched the videos with fascination and horror. Your people deliberately approach these creatures? While they're conscious and active? Not usually, Jake admitted. But sometimes it happens. Wildlife photographers, park rangers, hunters, hikers. Most encounters end peacefully if humans follow proper protocols. The key is understanding what the animal wants and not threatening it. The captain touched another control, and a new series of images appeared. These showed Jake's classmates from the orientation session, all looking significantly more distressed than when he had left them. Your revelation has caused a crisis among the student body, Captain Zenthara explained. Several species have requested emergency transportation back to their homeworlds. Others are demanding to know what other minor predators exist on Earth. Jake felt a stab of guilt. I didn't mean to scare anyone. I was just trying to be helpful. The fear is not entirely irrational, the captain continued. Our xenobiology teams have been analyzing your datapad contents with your permission. The preliminary results are disturbing. New holographic displays showed a comparison chart. On one side were the predators from Jake's videos, with detailed statistics about their size, strength, and capabilities. On the other side were creatures from the Galactic Predator database, including many of the aliens they had studied in Veltar's class. By galactic standards, your Earth predators outclass almost everything in our database, Captain Zenthara said quietly. A grizzly bear is more dangerous than a Xerian glass stalker. Your great white sharks exceed the threat level of void serpents, and tigers appear to be more efficient hunters than anything we've previously cataloged. Jake stared at the comparison chart, finally beginning to understand the scope of what he had revealed. But humans learned to live with all of these animals. We've been doing it for thousands of years. Exactly, Captain Zenthara said. Which brings us to the truly alarming question. What does that make humans? Before Jake could answer, the office door chimed and Veltar entered with several other beings Jake didn't recognize. They wore the insignia of the Galactic Council and carried data tablets filled with information. Captain, we've completed our preliminary analysis of the human's world, one of the newcomers announced. The results require immediate council attention. Veltar approached Jake's chair, moving more carefully than before. Student Morrison, we need to ask you some questions about human capabilities. Based on what we've learned about your world's ecosystem, we're trying to understand how your species survived long enough to develop intelligence. I don't know, Jake said honestly. We just adapted, I guess. Humans are pretty good at problem solving and working together. We developed tools and strategies for dealing with predators. Tools, repeated one of the council members. What kind of tools do humans typically carry for predator defense? Jake thought about this. Well, it depends on where you are and what you're doing. Hikers might carry bear spray or noisemakers. Hunters have weapons appropriate for their game. Park rangers have tranquilizer guns. Urban areas have animal control services. So every human is potentially armed for anti-predator warfare, the council member asked with what sounded like growing alarm. Not warfare exactly, Jake corrected. More like wildlife management. The goal isn't to eliminate predators but to minimize conflicts between humans and animals. Veltar consulted a data tablet. Student Morrison, our analysis suggests that humans have been engaged in active predator coexistence for your entire evolutionary history. Is this accurate? I suppose so, Jake agreed. Humans have always shared environments with dangerous animals. We learned to recognize their signs, avoid their territories when possible, and defend ourselves when necessary. And this knowledge is common among your people? Captain Zenthara asked. Basic knowledge, yeah. Any human who spends time outdoors learns to identify dangerous animals, read weather patterns, find water, and navigate terrain. It's just part of growing up. The council members exchanged glances that Jake's translator interpreted as expressions of disbelief and concern. Captain, one of them said, We need to convene an emergency session immediately. The implications of this discovery extend far beyond simple first contact protocols. As the meeting continued, Jake began to realize that his casual identification of a Cougar's call had fundamentally changed how the galaxy viewed humanity. What humans considered basic survival knowledge marked them as perhaps the most formidable species the aliens had ever encountered. Jake thought about his Uncle Larry, who lived peacefully on his Colorado ranch while Cougars wandered through his property. He thought about children learning to identify animal tracks in school, about hikers planning routes through bear country, about surfers who accepted the small risk of shark encounters. The galaxy, it seemed, was about to learn that Earth's most dangerous predator might not be the cougar after all.